Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's presentation. I'm Jim Van Epps, Vice President of the Savannah Council, as well as Chair of the Council's Program Committee, and host for this evening's presentation by Dr. Nilsen Bernardez. The presentation is entitled Supply Chains in the Age of COVID. COVID, interesting term we're learning. We hope everyone is staying healthy and safe, able to get your COVID vaccinations should you choose to do so. And I know you're all looking forward to re-engaging with your family and friends as Jane and I are. I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors for this evening's presentation with a word about each. First, as you see on the screen, Kreitz Auto Group is a platinum sponsor of the Savannah Council for 2020-2021. Kreitz is your exclusive local dealer for Buick, GMC, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Sprinter vans. Actually, Kreitz is a continuing sponsor for the 2021 program year, and we appreciate their support. Thank you, Kreitz. We have two other sponsors. First one this evening is the United Community Bank, which for 70 years has been committed to you. United works with you for your financial and personal goods are good in every interaction across every department and every location. United is committed to working hard every day to serve you and to help you build the business or the life you want. With the help of a community bank and the talents, product, and services of a larger institution, United can help you reach your financial goals. Thank you, UBC. And our third sponsor is Four Seasons Travel, which has operated as a full service agency in Savannah for the past 30 years, handling corporate, leisure, meeting, and group travel for clients throughout the United States. It's a locally owned and operated agency. Four Seasons is a member of this prestigious global travel network Virtuoso, a by invitation only roster of highly respected travel agencies. Also, thank you, Four Seasons. So our presentation this evening, as I mentioned, is by Dr. Nilsen Bernardez, and it's entitled Supply Chains in the Age of COVID. Dr. Bernardez on the screen is a professor of supply chain management and a program administrator at West Virginia University, where he founded the university's Global Supply Chain Management program. Before he came to academia, he worked in military transport aviation and the Innovative Aerospace aerospace industry. He holds a PhD from the University of Minnesota and a Master of Science degree in Operations, Innovation, and Technology Management. His main research interests include supply, network innovation, competitive dynamics, and digital information. He's a member of the editorial boards of several publications, and his research appears in the top empirical journals publishing studies in his field. Besides research, he's co-authored various books, including Digital Supply Networks. That's the short title. He'll talk about that this evening. He has led or facilitated innovation and performance improvement initiatives in large organizations, including Toyota, West Virginia University Hospitals, and the Drug Enforcement Agency. His efforts there have covered quality, logistics, and process flow issues. He's also served on the board of directors of government authorities and other organizations. So to the topic of Dr. Bernard's presentation, he will focus on the central concept behind his previously mentioned book, Digital Supply Networks. Transform your supply chain and gain competitive advantage with disruptive technology and reimagined processes. With new technological improvements evolving rapidly, supply networks digitalization is about to make an exponential leap forward. He will actually, with us, explore the concept of the entirely digitized and end-to-end connected supply network and its impact on organizations, industry, and economies globally. How do digital supply networks differ from traditional supply chains? We've been integrating, deploying technology, and automating supply chain activities for quite some time now, right? What's different? Why does it matter? And how can it impact workers, organizations, society, and global economies? So, following this presentation, Dr. Bernardez will take questions from our viewers that can be easily sent via the Zoom Q&A function on your computer or iPad. Just click on the icon on your screen, a box will appear, type in your question or your comment, click on the send button. And I suggest you do it early so that we can get to it during the Q&A period. The presentation, the entire presentation, including Q&A, is projected to end at 8 p.m. Now it's my honor to present Dr. Bernardez. Great to have you with us this evening. I wish it could have been with us in person, but Dr. Bernardez, the screen is now yours.
So, well, good evening, everyone. We might have some folks that is still good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm honored with the invitation from Jim and Jose. And I will talk a little bit about this idea of a digital supply network and in the context of COVID. So let me get started here. And before I start, so the major concept, as Jim mentioned, I'm not going to talk about it, but this is the book that we wrote recently. So we have been doing some research on this area. And the idea is to discuss this concept. So let me share my screen here, just a second. Okay, should be coming up. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
We can, yes.
All right, fantastic. So once again, good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here with you guys. And here's my flight plan for today. So I just want to talk a little bit about supply chains prior to COVID, then some of the things that have been happening now during COVID, and then introduce the concept of digital supply networks. All right, so let's get started here. And of course, in the end, we'll have a Q&A. So let me start with this first thought here. So COVID, I mean, as Jim joked in the beginning, is a new term, right? So we're all familiar with this term. But I think it lets us start recalling that COVID is not the first outbreak we face in the last several decades, right? So we have, you can see here, so we have had quite a few actually virus outbreaks, including the bird flu, COVID of course is going on now, but Zika, SARS, and the list goes on. So COVID is somewhat unique in how fast it is spread, mainly now that we're starting to have some variants that are spreading even faster. But the really most important aspect here is that all these other outbreaks that we had, they seemed to cross borders, but COVID is really spread globally. It had a global reach. So how did it impact supply networks? Well, first, if we go back to the beginning of last year, right after the lunar year, the new year, the Chinese New Year, they locked down Wuhan, a city with millions of people, right? So China is one of the major global supply chain hubs. So that first hit was local, but it reverberates throughout the supply chain because all of a sudden we don't have supplies coming in. But then as the virus started spreading through abroad to other countries, Germany, another global supply chain hub, and then finally US, well, supply of industrial inputs started to drying up, right? So, and then we started having, started observing some issues here at home. Now, what did we learn from this global pandemic? So there are several things, and I'm going to mention a couple of them as we go along. But one of them is that the design, or a broad one, is that the design of the modern global supply chain has weak points, and I think we have discussed quite a bit since last year, everybody has heard the term supply chain, something that was reserved for people working on the area before. Now, supply chains have become more resilient and more sophisticated over the last several years. And we see a great deal of adaptability. So even in the height of the pandemic, there was, of course, we heard the story of toilet paper and so on and so forth. Well, that was just an initial shock because we had a huge spike in demand, and it takes a little bit of time to adjust. But I have a big grocery store right across my street, and I could go there and still buy basically everything that I need. Of course, you're not going to get at that time you would not be able to get specialized, items. But most of the stuff was still available. So we could see a lot of headlines. Global supply chains are breaking. And I even gave some interviews where, well, that was the title. Of course, if you read the interview, I will be saying the same thing. Supply chains actually shown quite resilient. It got, they're pushed, but they were quite resilient. And an interesting thing here is that supply chains, they are responsible for our modern lifestyle. So I like to, sometimes I take, before going to class, I pick up, not now because we're not being able to have the face-to-face classes, but I enjoy stopping by the grocery store and picking up a little mini pineapple that is produced in Africa. And then I take to class. And then I make the point that, well, that little pineapple has traveled 7,000+ miles to reach my grocery store here, somewhat suburb of Pittsburgh, and allows me to enjoy that. So here actually I have a little picture of the opposite. So this is, I believe, is the last time that I was in China, and I don't remember if it was Shanghai or Hong Kong, but it really doesn't matter. This is also true. The opposite is true. So I had I found this little watermelon from California available right there. So this is I call it the small little miracle of global supply chains. So it allows us to afford all this, our modern lifestyle. All right, so now, not the first outbreak, not the first crisis either, right? So previous global crises have also disrupted supply networks. And companies have learned, supply chain professionals have learned from all those past events. So I believe we have some, yes, we have some here. So we can think about, we can cite a few, Japan in the 1995, mid-90s. We had an incident in Kobe, the earthquakes in Kobe. We had in the volcanic ash plumes in Europe somewhere a few years later that also caused a lot of disruptions. We have the global financial crisis of 2008 that we were recovering from that until very recently. We had the floods in Thailand. So all of those, each one of these events, they caused some disruptions and they shaped the design of global supply networks. So we made the supply networks increasingly more resilient in many levels. So let's take the Japan earthquake and tsunami, for instance. So if you guys recall, the meltdown there was a big disaster. It just so happened that that region was responsible for over 50% of the parts for the auto industry, a major supplier for the global auto industry. So that was a tremendous shock, and it led to a rearrangement, let's put it this way, of the global supply networks of the auto industry. Fukushima, so again, it's north of 50% at the time of the critical auto parts for the entire global market. So each one of these past events, they made the supply chains increasingly more resilient and informed the way that we designed supply chains. Now, an important thing here that I want to emphasize is that, again, over time, supply chain executives, they have increasingly added the risk management and the mitigation term that is really top of the agenda right now into their strategies. At the same time, balancing the resilience efficiency trade-off. And that's a very important. So this trade-off between resiliency and efficiency previously with a focus on efficiency has always informed the way that we configure supply networks. So these past events impacted different parts of the world, but their effects were still mostly localized. How COVID was different? Well, COVID was spread in a global scale, right? So it imposed really more severe supply and demand shocks in global networks. So COVID is again driving once again a re-examination of this trade-off or this equation: efficiency, resiliency. And not only the balance will change, so it's already changing and we will continue seeing changes on the years to come, but the variables as well. So the focus before was on efficiency. And even some of the digital supply network initiatives were focused on efficiency. Well, now that has changed slightly towards more flexibility and visibility. So those two variables are actually coming into play now. Now, another aspect here that I want to touch upon is that over the years, also global trade has been a topic of a lot of discussions, some of them very intense, very heated, and the globalization has been increasingly hot topic during COVID. So now globalization has various aspects. So before I go further, I want to say that I'm just focusing on the supply network aspect here. There are cultural, scientific, healthcare. I'm just focusing on supply chain and the flow of materials. Okay, for in this discussion here. So the way supply chains or global supply chains, the way that they work is quite complex. It's quite complicated. And reshoring, we're hearing a lot about reshoring, decoupling, so or relocating substantial stages of the value network. It is not a straightforward affair. It's not like I'm going to do it. Let's get started. So it is not quite like that. And we're going to see increasingly, for different reasons, not only COVID, but COVID has highlighted that. We have also other geopolitical, strategic issues going on that will bring back home or increase. There will be increasing demand to bring back home some of the stages of the electronics, ship making, and so on and so forth. And if you take a look at the newspaper earlier today, we see that the companies responsible for that sector, they are requesting the government for subsidies to bring it back home because the cost, they are not here because of cost. So again, that resilience, efficiency trade-off. So the other thing here is that we heard a lot about decoupling from China. And decoupling from China, many organizations still find very advantageous to produce in China. And the reason is the labor cost. The labor cost is actually not the biggest reason. The labor cost is a reason that we are already having stages of the value chain moving out of China way before COVID, way before other changes in national strategies. So, but the cluster of suppliers located, close by, with upstream and downstream all connected, it is unbeatable. There is, in order for that, it took China about 20, 30 years to build that. So for us to build this someplace else, it takes a while. So I'm not saying that it's not going to happen. It's happening. There is a lot of things happening. It's just not immediately. It will take time. And because of trade tariffs and other things, many companies actually adopted what we call the China plus one strategy. So to avoid the tariffs, they continued their operations in China to export to globally, and then moved some of the stage they replicated in a different area to supply, for instance, the American market or some of the European market. So we also, as I said before, the labor cost in China, which was responsible for a lot of companies going there in the first place, has raised. So many of the more labor-intensive activities, they have already been leaving there. So I used to do that. I like to do this in my classroom. I ask folks to just take the tag of your clothing and see where it was manufactured. So just a few years back, I would say a decade back, you'd see China all over the place. But more recently, you're going to start seeing India, Bangladesh, some places in Central America, because the labor costs became very high in China. So China has a booming middle class, and they have also advanced in more sophisticated manufacturing stage. So we will continue seeing the activity moving away from China towards Vietnam, towards other hubs. We will also have nearshoring. So some of these stages will come to Mexico, Canada, and we'll have some of them coming back home. Now, here's the interesting thing is that I'll come back to that a little later. In order for us to bring this, we're not going to bring back home those manufacturing, low value manufacturing activities. It's not economically feasible to do that. But the more sophisticated, and also we have strategic ones, such as some stages of healthcare. Now we have a lot of issues discussed during COVID of medicine and so on and so forth. So in order to bring these stages back, we will have to invest in digital capabilities to support the trade-off cost equation here. So as I was saying, so changes were already in play. So even before COVID, as I mentioned, a lot of activities were already moving out of China because this is just the natural progression as different regions evolve economically. There is this movement or this reconfiguration of the value chain. In the same way that some of this activity left US many decades back, some of them are leaving now China. And COVID is not the only factor playing a role in global supply network architecture. Now, definitely, it has highlighted geographical supply chain concentration and also the effects. So we saw this in the healthcare, the PPEs and so on and so forth, medicine and so on and so forth. Lots of discussion during the COVID. And particularly China. So China is really a major global supply chain hub. And it will continue for the years to come. So we also have other hubs, Germany being one of them. Of course, the US is one of them as well. Now, supply chain efficiency has been a top priority. So has been a top of the mind and drives configuration decisions and continues to do so, right? So the higher costs were already driving production from China, as I mentioned before, to other Southeast Asia countries. And the point is that COVID is not the only factor playing a role in this reconfiguration. So the pandemic seems to have just worked as a catalyst for all these different trends that were already going on. Now, of course, different industries have been affected in different ways. So in general, we can say that supply chains became more complex and extended, and organizations focused more significantly on balancing supply and demand accurately to achieve gains in efficiency. So that was the focus. So a lot of lean initiatives, a lot of taking the inventory. So in the lean lingo, inventory is considered a form of waste. And that's why we as customers can afford a lot of products and a lot of good stuff. And that's why I say our modern lifestyle. So this is what had been happening. Now, before I start now transition into what is going on now, let's just take a look at one particular supply chain. So there were lots of discussions during COVID, and I'm not going to focus on those. I'm going to focus on this one. So this is a company located in Asia, and they are the last that I heard, they are studying the opening of one manufacturing facility right here in US. Samsung, I believe, announced just a week or two ago the same thing. So we see that these things are ongoing. So globally, there are basically only two leading foundries that manufacture chips on a contract for other companies that are capable of producing the most advanced chips. So we're advancing now to this digital age, and the chips that we require, they are really very sophisticated. So maybe some of you or all of you have been reading about Dell. and Dell kind of, so that tells us the state of play here in this environment. Now, one of them is, of course, TSMC is located in South Korea, and actually, sorry, one is South Korea is Samsung, and then the other is in Taiwan. So Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. So this guy here. So this one is the largest. And many major US chip companies depend on this one company here to provide their most advanced products. So among them, there are all of this. So with the exception of YA, all the others are American. So here's an interesting fact. This is the supplier basically for all these companies. So here we can see this illustration very clearly. So we can see that Taiwan illustrates a single point of failure for most of the US largest and leading technology companies. So these issues, they have been ongoing for several years and people have been discussing them. But during COVID, these became more prominent. These issues became more prominent. Now, to further exacerbate how this, I like to use this as an illustration. So you have a single point of failure here for these very important companies, but that's not just it. So this Dutch company here is the only company that is able to produce advanced semiconductor materials lithography through TSMC. So essentially, they produce the machinery that allows TSMC to produce these sophisticated chips. So you see here another single point of failure. And the important thing here that I'm going to elaborate a little more as we move forward is that these dependencies here in many supply chains, they were invisible. A lot during COVID, we could see that many companies were unaware of all these relationships here. So I thought this one was kind of neat to illustrate. So I like this. I like a lot of this. I took from somewhere in one of the social media. But who led your digital transformation? COVID. So the pandemic has showed that many companies, as I mentioned, they were in the dark when it came to supplier relations. So mainly deeper suppliers, so suppliers located way further upstream the supply chain. So they lacked real-time visibility. So that was one of the things that we observed during COVID. Companies really completely blind to what was happening in their supply chain. Not all companies, but many companies. And the focus on optimizing costs and improving asset utilization in the last several decades, basically, as I said before, removed inventory, removed buffers to absorb disruptions, such as COVID. So when that happened, you started having these some issues. There were many other issues as well. We can talk about this for a whole day. But the pandemic, it showed that many organizations are not even aware of their supply chain vulnerabilities to global shocks. So fortunately, digitalization holds excellent promise. There's a lot of things happening on that field and has already been happening, but the focus is now moving from efficiency to resiliency. So all the digitalization that was happening before still and will continue having more efficiency focus, but now resiliency became way more prominent and important. So the need for demand sensing and greater visibility into into the suppliers or supply chains, they are clear takeaways from the pandemic. And agility and visibility, they are related in that we needed to be able to see right throughout the system in order to respond quickly. We can't respond quickly if we can't see. We saw a lot of companies putting people together and trying to piece together this manually, these different sources of data to try to make sense of what was happening. By the other side, there were some companies that, and I'm going to mention this example very quickly because otherwise we'll run out of time, but we can think about P&G, for instance. So before the Hurricane Sandy, way back, they had invested in digital control towers, which helped them deal with Hurricane Sandy very nicely. But at the time, even that capability, they thought that capability was too reactive. So a few years later, they invested further in the ability to not only to not react quickly to an event, but to actually react before the event took place. So companies like P&G, they fared much better during COVID. Meanwhile, those companies that had to piece these different types of information from different sources, many of them manually, they had a really hard time. So the idea here is that to basically I mentioned before, there will be a percentage of these activities in the global value chain moving back home, right? But this is a small percentage of the global network that will be reshoring. They will need to be digitally enabled to counter production costs for one, and to coordinate with all these different parts of the globe. And what we call digital supply network model will continue advancing across all sectors. So let's now talk about what is this new model. Let's talk about it a little bit. All right, so here we have our typical view of supply chain. So typically what we see is this sequence, right? A sequence of activities involving various stages with goods flowing typically downstream. We call downstream from supplier, from the raw material all the way to us, the customer. So, and information and money flowing, not necessarily, but typically, they actually flow both ways, but we can say that flowing upstream. Now, supply chain is conceived according to traditionally, this traditional model, is conceived again as a sequence, okay? A sequence of processes and activities from design to source to make to distribute, and increasingly to recycle, and we're starting to discuss now circular economy. But this representation has been tremendously useful to advance in practice and continue doing a great job. But this linear and sequential image also it encapsulates a plethora of siloed information systems across functional areas and the locations holding information. So ultimately, we end up, I like to use this, this idea, we end up with multiple versions of the truth. And we also end up with a lot of systems characterized by tremendous latency. And again, I think the word that really captures this is multiple versions of the truth. So we lack transparency and visibility. Now, we're to just finish illustrating that concept of a supply chain. So it's really not a chain, right? It's really a network. And if we take just the canopy of this aircraft, so this is a European fighter jet, and take the simple item, relatively simple item here. And when I say relatively simple, there is nothing simple about it. It's just that all the other systems in this platform are way more complex. And if we just this, and we map their supply network, it's just a canopy. So imagine if we map the entire aircraft. So we see that first is not really a chain, is a network. And second, is a complex network. And then third, that this I think brought this to everybody, is global. So it's a global complex network. So this view here really, it's starting to become difficult to accommodate the reality that we're living in the digital age. So we should see a continued transformation from a linear and siloed supply chain model to what we call a digital supply network. So where we can have a lot more agility. So we call this model the digital supply network. And it builds on the latest technological developments. So we're talking about cloud, 5G, artificial intelligence. It's a broader term for a lot of different technologies. But all these latest technological developments to dynamically provide near real-time visibility across various aspects of a supply chain simultaneously. You can't obtain that in this system where you work, you optimize, and then you use that as an input for the next sequence and so on and so forth. So in this model, what we have here, instead of focusing on processes, we focus on capabilities. So these are, if we look here, these are the same. So we still have the make, we still have the deliver, but instead of deliver, we call it dynamic fulfillment. So these features, they diminish the latency between new information and managerial action, which has proven crucial during during the pandemic. Now here we have, again, a linear sequence, and here we have our new, what we call it, the digital supply network. So it consists of capabilities that are interconnected, all of them interconnected, through, we call this a digital core. This could be a number of things, a digital control tower, for instance. But essentially, the idea here is that we have information flowing through all these different capabilities simultaneously and not sequentially. And this gives us visibility into what is actually happening, allowing us to make decisions way faster. So the digital supply network actually increases visibility, speed, and more important, it increases intelligence. So let's elaborate on this a little more. So some of you may be familiar with what we call the score model, but a score model is essentially this model here, this sequential model here. So in this slide, I just want to compare the traditional model with the digital capabilities model. So both models, they belong actually to the ASCM, the Association for Supply Chain Management. So I'm actually borrowing this from them. So the paradigm here in the SCORE model is the linear supply chain. In the GSM, I forgot to put it here, but in the GSM model, it's the network. In terms of organizational structure, in the traditional supply chain is hierarchical. So essentially we have a system, we decompose the system, and then we optimize and work with these different decomposed parts, which end up forming silos. In the GCM model, the organizational structure is actually relational. So it focuses on the relationship between all these capabilities here. And what we are looking here is what we call first order capabilities. Each first order capability has what we call second order capability, and they are all connected through flows of information. And I'll go in a little more detail in a second. And then in terms of technology relationship, in the traditional model, the idea is to implement leading practices. In the GCM, or in the digital supply network world, the idea here is to leverage all these new technologies to transform what we're doing, to break paradigms. So I'll provide some examples later if we have time. All right, so one of the ideas here, this one of the capabilities, so if you look in this model here, one of the capabilities is dynamic fulfillment. And what we have here is a notional view of dynamic fulfillment. So how dynamic fulfillment would look like once this is fully implemented. So it's entirely connected from design of the part and component actually all the way to the delivery to our house. So all this connected, nearly real time. So in order for us to have this capability, I'll focus just on this one to show to show us the second order capability that I just mentioned. So for this first order capability, we have all these second order capabilities. So I'm going to pick one of them here. We call this one automated fulfillment signals. So what this model here allows us to do is the ASCM digital capability models allows us to see what order, second order capabilities produce information that will be used by this second order capability. So here the notion of digital twin and so on and so forth comes to mind. So this is the interconnection between each one of the second order capabilities with the other second order capabilities from other first order capabilities. So this is the relationship, the capabilities, second order capabilities that supply information for this second order capability. And here we have the other second order capabilities that receive information from this second order capability. Now, okay, well, it's too fast. Yes, the idea here is not for us to go, and in fact, we have 39 of this, it's quite interesting. But the idea here is not to go into any of that. The idea here is just to show that this model, it really focuses, instead of sequential processes, and then we just optimize those sequential processes, it actually focuses on the relationship and the interconnections that we have across all these different capabilities. And the other point here is that this model is, well, first, when we talk about digital supply network, this is not an end product. So digital supply chain management, digital supply network would be a very advanced, the most advanced stage. So in between, there is a whole journey that companies have to undergo, and we have several of them in very advanced stages. Can chip, I call it the chip shot. Amazon. Amazon is a great example. During the pandemic, you still could go there and buy your stuff, and you could still go there and Amazon will tell you, okay, this product here will not arrive until 2 months later. So even though they couldn't deliver, they knew that they could not deliver, or they knew what they could deliver and when they could deliver. And they adapted very quickly. All right, so now, when we talk about these capabilities, so each one of those capabilities that we saw in the model is a combination of three things: process, technology, of course, and we focus a lot on technology, and people. So when we talk about digital supply networks and even Industry 4.0 and so on and so forth, there is a lot of discussion about what's going to happen to socially. Actually, in the book, we talk a little bit about that aspect, but I'm not going to go that far in this presentation, but just we'll focus a little more on the worker side. But there are, well, as I'm showing there, the bad, the good, and the ugly, right? So the good thing is, and this is what we focus a lot on our book, is that digital transformation is not about merely implementing digital technology. It's about leveraging these technologies to transform how we do things. So we can think about examples. For instance, there was a case, proof case last year that an airliner from New Zealand took off from New Zealand towards US, towards Los Angeles, and on the way, that was a proof of concept. On the way, they radioed, they identified a problem on a first class seat, and that problem would cause the aircraft to come back with that seat empty, which is a tremendous loss for the aircraft. So the crew radioed ground in New Zealand. The ground identified the part, contacted electronically a supplier in Singapore. The supplier sent the inventory to LA through the cloud. And when I say they sent the inventory, they sent the digital inventory. In LA, another company. So you see that there's a global supply chain going on here, but very different from the traditional supply chain. 3D printed the part, shipped it to the airport. When the aircraft landed, the part was already there. During the normal turnaround, they replaced the part, the aircraft flew back, no problem, as if nothing had happened. So this example, I think, captures a little bit of what I'm saying, what I mean when I say leveraging technology to change the way that we have been doing things. So I think this example kind of captured that. The other thing is not about replacing workers. It's not about replacing humans either. It is about augmenting the workers. So we can see examples from Amazon where the workers that used to carry heavy boxes and stuff around, they are now responsible for robots. And that brings me to the point here, is that requires a completely different skill set. So companies, governments, academia, we all have to come together to make sure that we prepare the workforce for this transition, because as every transition that we have ever had, there will be a lot of jobs that will disappear, but there will be new jobs as well. Now, what has been discussed there are two camps out there in the field. One believes that this will continue happening. So in the same way that it happened in the past, a lot of jobs will disappear, but new jobs will be created, and in overall, they will balance. I kind of subscribe to that, emphasis on kind. The other camp believes that this is going to be different. So we're talking about artificial intelligence technologies, and they will replace a lot of people and finish a lot of jobs, and the new jobs that will be created will not compensate. So that is a different camp. I don't believe that will be, I believe that there will be something more towards the first or in between. But there is a lot of discussions there, and we need to have these discussions, and we need to prepare the workforce to make the transition, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of social and economic problems. This goes a little beyond the topic here. We talk a little bit about this in the book. And then finally, as I mentioned, well, there's all these new skill sets, right? We have to leverage what the human beings have of best. And among them is, of course, creativity. But we also have to have lifelong learning. It was already important before, but it's now even more important. It's going to become bread and butter, because all this change is happening, and happening increasingly faster. 4 years, 5 years of college, it's not going to cut it. We're going to have to be continuously learning. Communication skills. So not simply communication skills, business as always, but now you have a worker that have to look at the system without seeing what is inside, and have a mental representation of what is going on there, and have to be able to communicate that to a very diverse group of people. So and then we have other skills here, but the point is that there are lots of material out there. Each one advocates for slightly different skills. I think there is a commonality. I think these are very common to all of them. But the point here is that there will be a lot of changes, and we must prepare ourselves, and we must be in a position to prepare others, to prepare the workers, to take advantage of these new technologies, of the new jobs that will be created. Otherwise, we will have a lot of problems. All right, so this is, I believe, let's see, this is me. So I'll open for some questions. I think I'm 7 seconds ahead of time. So there, now 40 minutes. Jim told me to finish it in 40 minutes. As a pilot, I have to finish in 40 minutes. So I'll open for questions if we have any.
Hey, well done, Skipper. Well done. Thank you.
I'll stop hearing here.
Can you hear me, Ed?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, Dr. Bernardus. I've only got a couple questions, and what I'd like to do is therefore key your mind that if you had a couple backup slides that you wanted to show us, let's cover the questions, and then in the remaining time, if you have a couple of other things. It is such an interesting, complex presentation that you've made, and it really, I think, portrays the environment. And I'm going to start out with a very simple question. And rather than an industry that produced that European aircraft, for instance, let's take smaller organizations. And I'd like to say that there are producers, and I'll say factories, companies that have taken pride in evolving toward just-in-time inventory, therefore saving on their needs for inventory and warehousing and so forth. And how do these small and mid-sized companies, how do they adapt? How do they prepare for this kind of a circumstance, COVID I'm talking about, that really didn't give us more than possibly, if for those who are really paying attention, maybe 8 weeks of lead time? How would those small and mid-sized firms that rely on their just-in-time inventory, how would they adapt?
That's a great question, and actually there was a lot of vilification of Lean and Six Sigma, and this is really, it's further from the truth. First, because that is not really what Lean is about, and Lean is really about improving, getting rid of waste, getting rid of rework. Now, I would say that actually impacted both. It doesn't really matter small, big. The difference is that the smaller ones, bigger companies, they have more cash flow. They have more. Some of them are already more digitized, while smaller ones are not. So what I would say here is the good news. The good news is, and we saw this during the pandemic, is that many of these new technologies, they are now affordable to everybody. So before, if you think about an ERP system costs millions of dollars. But now you can get a lot of different, all these systems that you need to do analytics in your company, for instance. You can get them over the cloud. So, and it became much more affordable for smaller companies. And what we saw during the pandemic, I'm gonna even mom and pop shops in the corner.
Yeah.
I don't mean my corner, but across the US. We saw, I mean, all of them had to shut down, right? There was no other way. They had to shut down. Wasn't even a matter of inventory or anything. It was just, you have to shut down. You cannot have business during because of all those restrictions. So what many of them did is really the spirit of what we're living. They moved online. So we saw a lot of restaurants, a lot of mom and pop shops producing different things. They came from having nothing to creating a website and started doing business digitally, accepting cards and then just focusing on the delivery. So I think the key thing really here is to have the ability to be willing to adapt for this new environment. So of course there are other things as well. For instance, there are some supply chains that they have been shut down. That was it because of different restrictions. But there were a lot of companies, farmers. We saw a lot of farmers in Florida and California taking millions of tomatoes and fruits and other things and having to pretty much plow them again, throw them back to the ground and plow over because the supply chain is very rigid. So you can't reroute it the way that they are organized now. You can't reroute it from selling to grocery to sell to restaurants, for instance. They're very, very specialized. But we also saw some farmers and even smaller farmers. Again, they came up with a website and they figured out a way to sell this over the internet and then just deliver following all the protocols. So I think I'm going through too far here. The idea really is to explore these possibilities and be willing to think differently. And this I think is kind of common for small and big companies, but the smaller companies, they might not survive. So we think about P&G right here in the Panhandle of West Virginia. This manufacturing this new plant will be entirely automated, and it's the first multi-product line. So if you are a supplier for a company like that, and you are not digitized, you are not able to exchange digital information, chances are that you're going to lose the job, or you're not going to be able to relate to that company. So we really have to start thinking differently and try to leverage this technology. And they're becoming more affordable. So it's not like you have to make a tremendous, the barriers have lowered a little bit. There are a lot more that we can talk about this one, but I hope this one at least.
Yeah, that was good. And I think what your background and your experience and your education says is that there are people like you that if those small and mid-sized firms would reach out and say, I need help, I see what's coming, and I'm about to go under here, can you give me a hand? I think that's also a possibility.
Absolutely. Lots of companies doing that, and lots of states also putting their faculty and different resources available to the community. Even in our university here, we helped some companies on their movement to an online environment. And I think Michigan did that. Ohio, I believe, has some initiatives in that sense as well. So absolutely.
Okay. Now I've got another question, and the question comes from Frank. Oh, wrong one. Sorry. That's not what I want. There we go. The question that comes from Bill, I'm sorry, who appears to have a role in your business, I would say. His website is savannahsupplychain.com. And his question pertains, he says, to trends on using blockchain to replace EDI transactions, which I assume is electronic data interchange.
That is correct.
Can you address Bill's question, please?
Yeah, so there is a lot of experimentation going on in terms of blockchain for different applications. And there is a lot of discussions in terms of standards and different things. So I don't think blockchain is not quite there yet, but is maturing sufficiently. There was in some point we were questioning, well, we believe that this technology will get there, but it's not going to be this technology, it's going to be some different version. But now we're in a point that we're starting to see this taking place. So the example that I just gave is over blockchain. I'm currently working with a graduate student actually in Brazil, and that he partnered with a company there in the red meat supply chain, and they're going to use blockchain in that stage to monitor transactions. So I believe this we will see increasingly more use of blockchain, and blockchain is one of the the skin of this digital supply network that we talk about. So I think the trend, it's increasing the exploration of a blockchain for a lot of different things.
Okay. Next question that I have. Thank you. The next question comes from Dan, and Dan's question is: how does forcing, his expression, "made in the USA" impact U.S. industry?
What?
How would forcing "made in the USA" impact industry?
Okay, that is a delicate question.
Yeah, we are. Let me jump in with a disclaimer. As those of us who are pay attention to the Savannah Council programs, and probably all of our sister program councils also, we are non-political. So we try to make our questions as neutral as possible, but I just lobbed it over and it's in your lap now.
Yeah, no, it's not even for that. It's a complex question. So what the pandemic showed us is that we do have to have certain stages of this change in US. So we think about the most of the active ingredients for drugs, they come from India, and some of them either India or China, or PPEs. If you think about the latex come from forgotten now, somewhere in Asia. Almost the entire world of production comes from that place. So the pandemic told us that look, we can't have that type of dependence. So we have to have something here in case something like this happens, because we saw that during the pandemic, everybody shut down. We shut down. We said, well, we're going to prioritize our own people, and so did every other country. So that kind of highlighted that aspect. And then we have also other industries that are extremely important for US. So think about this digital supply network and digitization in general. So China has made a concerted effort. So they have what they call China 2025, which would be the manufacturing 4.0 from Germany. And they're very serious about it. They're investing heavily on becoming a leading country on that. So we're starting to hear increasingly the term great power competition. So we also have to invest on that. And part of this, the brain of this whole operation, are microprocessors. And we are kind of losing that capacity. So we must have something here. And there are several, I believe, so far successful initiatives to bring some of this here. They're still going to be produced in South Korea, and but we're going to have some operation here, and that is what is important. So now let's go to the question itself. So how that would impact industry? There is a possibility, a very strong possibility, that we will have higher costs in some of these. If we start forcing certain things, many of these might become more expensive, and in some cases even more less competitive. So when you think about, let's think about any smartphone. Well, there are some components of this product that they are produced in a particular region of the world, because that particular region of the world is the best place for that particular item. So they specialize on that. So if a given brand of a smartphone in US were to do that themselves, chances are that they would not have scale enough to do the investments and so on and so forth to be competitive with the raw material in other places, which means that the final product might be less competitive. So now this is a very general. Of course, there are particular cases, there are different things. As I said earlier today, I saw in one of the Wall Street Journal, one of these outlets, talking about exactly the Dell and some other manufacturers in the computing industry, asking the government for subsidies to actually bring these activities to the US. So some of them we do have to have, I believe we do have to have some of these stages here, but we also have to be careful, because we might shoot ourselves in the foot by increasing costs and becoming less competitive. And again, it's very complex. There are different supply chains. but we may kind of harm our competitiveness in some of them. So I'll keep that as more general. Another discussion. Each one of these questions, we can have a whole presentation on them, apparently.
Yeah. Obviously. So we're up against the 8 o'clock hour when we promise our viewers and also our presenters that we'll wrap up. So at this point, in conclusion, Dr. Bernardus, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Savannah Council for an outstanding presentation, as well as your answers to our questions. And we're grateful for your contribution to our program on a topic that is so complex. But it enhances a lot of the reading that I think we have all tried to do on this topic anyway, particularly with the context of COVID. So thank you.
While you prepare there, I'll just let me thank everybody for this opportunity and for hearing me. And feel free to contact me to continue discussions. We're all excited. Me, my co-authors, and my research friends. We're always very excited about this topic.
Very good, Jim.
Thank you. And there's our programs there, Dr. Bernardus, and my apology for stumbling through that. But we want to advertise what our upcoming programs are. And our March 25th program is Education in Belize by the Honorable Patrick Faber, who has quite a portfolio, as you can see underneath him. So again, Dr. Bernardus, thank you so much. We certainly hope our paths will cross again. And to all of our viewers, thank you for participating this evening. And with that, good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.